Generation 2. I was asked to moderate this panel discussion because I'm also on the Raine Study Community Advisory Committee, and I used to be a journalist, emphasis on newspaper journalist. So if I'm stuttering or hands are shaking, then that's why you know I didn't go into TV. The honour is, of course, the opportunity to have a conversation with the incomparable Fiona Stanley, Professor Fiona Stanley. I believe I can speak for myself and my fellow participants here that this is an absolute treat. Before we begin, some introductions. So just on the end there, we'll go this way, we have Oliver. Oliver. He completed an apprenticeship in plumbing and now works in real estate. As you can see, he's a Gen 2. He is dad to 2-year-old Sydney and 3-month-old Nancy, who we actually heard from a little bit earlier, about 10 minutes ago. And now she's going to sleep through her dad's presentation, which is very rude. He's also a dad to a Kelpie named Alison. Oliver sits on the Raine Study Community Advisory Committee and in his spare time loves fishing, diving, swimming and surfing. Next up, we have Generation 1, Rachel, who was recruited to the Raine Study during her pregnancy. Rachel holds undergraduate nursing and postgraduate qualifications in critical care nursing, midwifery, child and adolescent community nursing. She currently works as a clinical nurse consultant with East Metro Health. She is a wife, mother and Mimi to 2, soon to be 3, beautiful grandbabies. And finally, we have Tara. So Tara is another Gen 2. She is one of the Raine Study's lifelong participants. She holds a Bachelor in Nursing from Notre Dame and a postgraduate diploma of midwifery from Curtin. Tara works in medical device sales and as a net registered nurse and midwife at King Edward Memorial Hospital. She is also a mum to 12-year-old Logan and 6-year-old Luella and enjoys doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. Yeah. In her spare time. Can't even pronounce it, couldn't even attempt it.
No intensity exercise, I think it is.
So given today's theme is family, it strikes me as pretty special that we have 2 midwives on this panel and that all of you are parents. I think it makes sense that we start at the beginning of this story about 33, 34 years ago. For 3 of us, we were cooking away, totally oblivious. But for Rachel and Fiona, you were quite busy. Fiona, when and why did you get involved in the Raine Study?
Well, John Newnham, who designed a... Can you hear me? Yes. I must say it's lovely to be here and to see all the family and to participate. And the reason I didn't want to give a keynote is that I don't give keynotes anymore because I haven't got the data at my fingertips. So I'm mostly doing mentoring and advocacy, particularly for the Yes campaign. So I'm still pretty devastated by that. So John Newnham approached us in 1989, and Lou, Lando, me, Con Michael and John were the initial CIs on the project, but it was John Newnham's baby, a pun, but anyway. And the exciting thing about the Raine Study, and one of the reasons I was very keen to be involved in it, although John, we didn't actually know we were going to have to fund it for the next bloody 20-something, 30 years. But anyway, that's another story. But was because it started off as a randomised controlled trial, asking the question of whether serial ultrasounds in pregnancy were of benefit or damaging compared with one ultrasound at 18 weeks. Now, that was I'd come back from the NIH where I'd done some further training in epidemiology and public health. And it was a question that couldn't be answered unless you did a randomised trial. So we were the only randomised trial in the world, I think, John, that did this. And of course, I was very interested because my whole career has been interested in the causal pathways, developmental pathways for children and young people, and particularly we're interested in pregnancy. And this was the sort of beginning of the huge developmental origins of health and disease work that the Raine Study has been such an incredibly important part of. And the reason we're an incredibly important part of it is because of this antenatal recruitment, because we had to recruit the mums antenatally, and we had to see if they would agree to having either one ultrasound or having multiple ultrasounds. So that was an amazing methodology, and I think really exciting. And perhaps I'll leave it at that. But that one of the reasons is we just didn't know it was going to go on for so long, and we would, of course, we'd set up the institute by this time. Lou and I had set up the telethon. Well, at that stage it wasn't called the Telethon Kids Institute, but is now. And so we had a home, if you like, for the Raine kids. And I must admit, it became a really family event for our institute to have this Raine study as part of it. It was terrific.
You've beautifully introduced one of my first questions, and I'm going to jump to Rachel because she's particularly interested in that recruitment process.
Yes.
As one of those near 3,000 women who signed up.
So first of all, in amongst all of us being thanked as the participants, I'd really like to take the opportunity to say, sorry, I'm a bit nervous, to say thank you for being part of this family for me, and I think for us, is because it allows us to leave a legacy for our community and our children that's bigger than just being the ordinary person. So that's just a little something. It was the pregnancy for my first child, and I happened to be in the King Eddie's area, and I just appeared, for my antenatal and was approached. And I actually accessed, because I wasn't working in health at that time, I trained a lot later, and I actually accessed the original publication and looked at, the numbers of us that were recruited, which were enormous when they actually looked at who was appropriate. That, you managed to talk sort of 90% of us or something into participating in this study, which is incredible.
Well, our patron has alluded to the fact that WA is a great place because, you've got the desert and the rabbit-proof fence on one side and the ocean on the other, and once we've got you, we're not going to let you go. But there's something more about WA families, not just in the Raine study, but in almost every single study that we've done in West Australian families. Those that have, of course, got an affected child, a birth defect or something, very high participation. But we get an incredibly high participation in women who have not had a baby with a problem or who just want to participate. I'm going to get emotional soon, but it's just been an amazing place to do research when you've got that kind of participation. And in terms of the folate study, for example, we got over 95% participation from the control mums. That's extraordinary. So,
and showing that we've all...
It's a legacy.
A
it's
lot
nice
of us
thing to
are
say,
still here,
that
which is incredible.
They left a legacy. I think that's a gorgeous term. We should
That word
use that.
legacy has come up a lot actually in
Good,
conversations
good.
in preparation
Yeah,
for this panel
yeah,
discussion.
yeah.
Sorry, did you have another follow-up? No.
For some perspective as a participant, my son wonderfully pointed out this morning, and trying to make me feel old, that I'm about 12,000 and something days old. So for that, they were saying that some of these things take about 6 hours, so you've got 4 hours for your heart study and then some surveys and getting there and that kind of thing. All that you're asking is for, in approximately every 1,000 days of my life, you're asking for 6 hours. And in turn for that, we get this evidence-based medicine feedback almost in real time. It comes on the news and I'm like, I've already told everyone. I already know. I know the ins and the outs. I met the person that started the study. So we do, our legacy as people and as a group is that we leave behind this data that will not only help our generations, but also help WA, Australia and the world as a whole with our whole population data.
Going back to the start of it all, I know, Oliver, you had a question about what groups were involved at the start and how that progressed.
Yeah, in the very early days, I'd be interested to hear about who were some of the groups that approached the Raine study to use our data.
Well, the study arose out of King Edward, and John can correct me if I've got any errors with my memory as a 77-year-old. Actually, I wanted to tell you a funny joke that my brother, when I turned 70, my brother said, "Welcome to your 8th decade." And I thought, what an awful, oh, God. And he was right, of course, it is my 8th decade, but it didn't make me feel any younger. But, Ollie, to answer you, yes, we focused the study at King Edward because it had to be, it has always been an intensive study. And we had to collect a lot of information during the pregnancy and blood samples and so on. The other prerequisites for the study were that we were trying to, and this is particularly John's input, but also from us, that we needed to get as best follow-up as we could. The thing that really gets in the way of making a cohort study less translatable into the general population is if you lose a lot of people at each follow-up. And cohort studies are renowned for that. I mean, people actually move after they've had a baby. It's really annoying, really annoying. But the other huge advantage, so we wanted people who spoke English, who were more likely to stay, all those sort of things. So you were a bit of a select group, actually. But when you look at as Beck was saying earlier, look at the social distribution across the Raine study, it does mirror the population of Western Australia. So we were pretty happy, even with subsequent follow-ups, we were representative of the WA population, which is really quite important in terms of the statements that you're making and the interpretations. But the other thing that was so good about doing this study in Western Australia was that we have and had some of the best record link data in the world. And so what we did at subsequent follow-ups of the Raine study populations was to ask their permission to link their family and children data into our total population longitudinal data sets. So even in the kids that we had lost to follow-up, as we call it, we had information from the linked data as to where they were. If they were in Western Australia, we had information on all of those, if they'd been in hospital, what for, and we even had information on things like educational outcomes, child protection outcomes, police, and justice, so we could actually link these kids into this longitudinal data set. So
nobody's completely lost from
no one's completely lost from Western Australia except those people who leave us, which is very, very annoying. So whilst it was a select, a selection of people that would be part of it, I think also there was something about the study that obviously attracted the families. And I'm actually wondering, you should look at this in the data to see whether the Raine study influenced people going into health areas. I remember David telling us, David Mackey, that that when we were doing some of the eye follow-ups, there were 4 medical students who'd been Raine kids. I keep on bumping into Raine kids all over the place, except you're quite old now. I just would think we should say, well, did you do this particular? Did you go and do nursing because of the Raine study, Rachel?
Oh, maybe. It's interesting when you talk about that they have moved away. We actually, as a family, lived in Vanuatu, which is in the South Pacific, for a 4-year period. And our daughter was probably, I don't know, about 10, 12, and they managed to find us there and arrange for one of the posts that was one of your volunteer students who was then working in Brisbane, and we had a girls' weekend in Brisbane and managed to arrange and meet up with this gentleman who performed all of the testings for that follow-up with Rebecca. So, just because you moved away, you didn't completely...
That's a great story. That really is terrific.
Tara, it's something that we were talking about, and I think everyone in this room kind of thinks about. The Raine study was intended as being a relatively short-term thing. It was for a single purpose, and then it got as big as it is now. We were talking about...
Like, at what point did you realise the enormity of this on not only the cohort that you had and the research that you could draw from it, but the whole population, so WA, Australia, the world?
Well, I think, we were one of the first states to really have a group of people interested in getting great population data. And it really started with Michael Hobbs, who's now about 97. He came back from Oxford having done his DPhil in record linkage, and he was the one who said to me, here's all the perinatal data, take it. But we have wonderful data in Western Australia, and so we realise that having midwives data, for example, and having all the registry data and all these other longitudinal studies, and having, therefore, an overview. So you can do an overview by looking at these trends in the whole population data. But the real questions you might want to ask is, well, what about bone density and, et cetera? And you can't do that in a total population data, but you can do it in the Raine study. So it was very informative to have this sort of large epidemiological data sets where we could look at trends and look at risk factors and protective factors. But if you wanted to know some really deep things, particularly relating to psychosocial problems and those sorts of things, then the Raine study data was it. I think one thing I'd just like to mention fairly early on is about the consumer involvement in the Raine study. And this was before Anne Mackenzie joined us. But Garth Kendall was the scientific director of the Raine study for some years, and he went to Avon, to the Avon longitudinal study in Bristol, which is very, very famous. I would like to say that actually we've had better follow-up, anyway, than the Avon study. But and we had very good friends in that study that I'd actually trained with as well in Oxford. And Garth went and said, well, how do you get follow-up? What do you do to get good follow-up? And so he came back and implemented, things like the kids' club, or, the fact that... And then Anne came on board and did all the roundtables about, what should be in the next lot of studies. And, of course, we were worried about the genetic stuff, and, oh, my gosh, getting people's DNA. The kids loved it. And I remember the round table that we had with the kids. We want our genetic data, It was terrific. So we could burst a few myths by going to the community and saying, what is it that you want to have measured on you, and why is that so important? So I'm getting goosebumps already, but it was just a fantastic way of how we as researchers interacted with the community of the Raine study to get the best outcomes. And that really has made a huge difference. I think we're probably the only study in the world, I'm going to say this a bit too often, where we've had such an amazing consumer and community input. And Anne, of course, has written the book on how to do research with proper community and consumer involvement, and has influenced NHMRC. I think you even invited to Obama's health forum at one stage to advise... Yes, all right. See, I like embarrassing people with nice things, but, we're very, very lucky to have cottoned onto that very early, because it has made a difference, and it has made a huge difference in terms of follow-up, which is going to make it scientifically much more valid to have that follow-up.
It's wonderful to hear that other side of it, because speaking as a participant, I learned things about my health and was diagnosed with health conditions long before I would have found out about them. And that is what I'm truly grateful for with this study. And even if it wasn't diagnoses, it was being more aware of my body and myself. And is that something that you guys share as well? That,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
I asked, I'm a midwife at King Edward, and I worked alongside Prof. Needham, not name dropping, sorry. But I remember approaching him, probably almost 10 years ago, and saying, I'm a Raine baby. So he then stops, and he stops in the middle of his antenatal clinic, and I'm really sorry to whoever was boss that day, but gave me 20, 30 minutes of his time, and so excited about the data exchange. But it's that constant feedback that you've spoken about, and being able to be proactive in your healthcare. And my grandmother and my mother have both passed from breast cancer. And so having that information on genetic factors and preventable things, I went through and had genetic testing for breast cancer, and then had the gene. And then I knew from being so involved in research that your outcomes are much better. So I went ahead in May this year and had a prophylactic double mastectomy and reconstruction.
Wow.
Because of, the power that we've had through the Raine study. Like, knowledge is so powerful for us.
Oh, it's another gorgeous story. Yeah. But it made the fact that you were more aware, because you're in the Raine study, of health and healthy pathways, and we did that because of you, because we had this relationship that was unique, because we'd had the input of people who told us that it was very important to speak to people and ask questions. Ollie, what were you going to add to that?
I was fortunate enough not to really have anything major picked up, but little things like I needed glasses at some point, and I think that was probably the most major one that was picked up with me, so I was quite lucky. But
Yeah.
yeah, like every follow up, the last one, like, oh, I noticed my skin folds were getting a little bit. Maybe I need to take the dog on some longer walks. Yeah, those were the main ones for me.
And congratulations on this little family over here. It
Thank
looks
you very
so
much.
lovely.
Yeah. She was
So-
squawking a little bit before, but
Oh.
looks like she's nodded off
Squawking
now.
is totally permissible.
Yeah.
It's lovely to have a generation 3 in the room, and it's something that, Rachel, you're talking about legacy and thinking to the future. You know, participants are having families of their own, and I guess this question is open to all, but where do you see the Raine study going? Do you hope that your children and your grandchildren and their children will be involved as well?
I was really thrilled to hear about the funding and the inclusion of the Gen 3, because I think it's that, you know, really the Gen 1s got recruited, the Gen 2s, they kind of got dragged into. There's a certain period of being teenagers that they may have, well, mine particularly, had to be shoehorned a bit into continuing to be a participant, but now is wholly on board. And so to have that our Gen 3, and I believe, you know, all of mine are very little, but, you know, we have 18-year-olds that are out there that we have so much information about who they are, where they've come from, you know, what their grandparents, what they were painting, and what kind of house they lived in when their parents were just a twinkle, really. So being able to continue, I think, is a really huge step and something that I'm very excited about.
Well, that reminds me of another issue that we had, because we had to actually get re-consent once the children, the Gen 2s, became 18. Now, of course, we had lost some to follow up, and there may have been some reluctant debutantes that weren't participating. But what happened when we managed to convince the Ethics Committee that if we tried very hard, because there were two issues. One is we wanted to get consent so you could continue in the study, and we actually recruited back some more teenagers that had dropped out and then wanted to come back in. So that was very, very reassuring and fun. But the second bit was that we wanted to continue to use the data, and we had to get permission from the 18-year-olds, even the ones we hadn't contacted, to do that. So we convinced the Ethics Committee, and I think this was a very good decision of the Ethics Committee, not that I'm biased, was that if we had tried very hard to contact the families, and we did, we advertised, we wrote to them all again, we really went, and we didn't get a response, we would accept that we could use their data. And I think that was really, really good. But people have come back into the study. That's what's so, Beck's been telling me about that. And that's so, well, that's very rewarding for us as researchers, because you don't want to do research which in any way is going to have a negative effect on people. What you want to do is research that produces great results that the participants actually feel that they're part of and that they're okay with.
Yeah. And that it's beneficial for them and for going forward for their community.
Yeah. No, I think that's lovely.
The allure of the study is quite strong. My husband, who is not a Raine baby, he has FOMO, fear of missing out. He wants to be involved. He's like, take my blood, and I'm like,
oh, we've got another cohort. That is the spouses of the Gen 2s. So let's go.
That could be if you have Gen 3.
Well, that's it. That's what.
Get on with it.
So there's my mother in the room. Specifically, Fiona, if you had a crystal ball, and what would you hope to see for the Raine Study's future?
Well, I do think that the longitudinal nature of this study is unique, and the fact that we recruited antenatally and have got all the antenatal information and many of the samples still. But my concerns about the future health and well-being of children relate to a whole lot of issues. Obviously, we're incredibly anxious about climate change, and all these latest wars mean that you can almost forget about climate change, I think. But anyway, we won't go there. But the value of finding out about the environmental issues that occurred during pregnancy and early years in relation to long-term outcomes is really important. And I don't think we're anxious enough about environmental contamination. Everyone, I mean, it's great that we're now looking at the microbiome, and what is the impact of how we've treated our microbiomes from antenatally right through is a really important question for not just disease of the gut, but disease of the brain and the heart and so on. So that's very exciting, and I think the Raine study will have... You see, the Raine study is good for those things which are common. So if you have measurements of blood pressure, everyone has blood pressure, it's great, but not everyone's going to get heart disease or, you know, some other, perhaps rarer thing. But what's so exciting, and it was illustrated beautifully by the presentations this morning, is that the number of values you have, the number of outcomes you have that are common enough to be analysed by the Raine data. But I am quite concerned that we're not worried enough about exposures in the environment, and microplastics is a very good example of that. So once we start looking, my gosh, it's very worrying. Now, we've had increases in our society in these new morbidities, which are incredibly worrying to us. I mean, ADHD, autism, all these mental health problems. Now, you may say, well, that's the social society with extreme capitalism. Everyone has to fight everyone else, and it's very stressful, and it's all due to stress hormones and so on. I don't know. I just think that with the rate of increase, they're certainly not genetic. It's too quick for that, although there may be a genetic component, as there is to every disease and problem that we see. But I think we really have to take a very big interest in what environmental contaminants were there during pregnancy and during the early years. And the Raine data will be very, very important for that. Now, it may be that there are some rarer outcomes we won't be able to look at, but it might, you know, with the thing that's exciting about the Raine is you can get all the cohort studies around the world together, and then you've got huge power to look at these. Now, not all of them were intelligent enough, as we were to recruit antenatally, but they still can get some information about that. So that, to me, is, if I'm crystal balling, it's going to... Usually, the longer a study goes on, a cohort study, the more valuable it becomes. And I think this intergenerational stuff is really, really great. We'll be able to look at what you were exposed to and then what happened to your baby. And because we know that a lot of these things particularly occur in the risk factors and the protective factors for healthy development start in pregnancy and early childhood. And that's the huge issue that we have to get our governments, our politicians and our bureaucrats to understand. And the Raine study should be one of the most powerful. It already has influenced WHO, which is fantastic. I didn't know that. But we need to get this information into where we can advocate for the investment of the early years. I can't believe that, you know, I've been advocating, knocking my head against the brick wall for the last 40 years about early childhood and how important it is an investment. And we're doing it all over again. We've now got, I'm on the early years strategy for this, for the federal government. And you just sometimes think, you know, don't people get it? And that's why studies like the Raine study are so important, because you've got the information, you've got the data.
I suspect the format of this conversation was so that you could avoid talking about yourself too much, but I would be remiss not to ask, how would you say your involvement with the Raine study has shaped and influenced your work?
Well, I think that when we set up the Institute, the thing that was exciting for me was that I realised the limitations of epidemiology by itself to look at the causal pathways, and we had to look at, you know, this was before the Genome Project, but, you know, had to look at genes and cells and environments in the body, as well as getting very good data on clinical outcomes, but also what was happening in our society, so the big population data sets. So the reason our institute was unique was that not that we had all the sort of immunologists and the cell biologists and the gene jockeys and all the rest of it, but we had population data, and we had people who were interested in the social determinants of outcomes. And as I've mentioned, the environmental ones. But so that was unusual in an institute in Australia at that time. And I remember Gus Nossel, who was one of our most wonderful guests. You might not know who Gus Nossel is, some of you actually, but he is probably one of Australia's most well-known scientists, immunologist, former director of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in Melbourne, and my husband's PhD supervisor. It's a wonderful family in medical research. And he came to morning tea at the Institute when he was Australian of the Year, and he said, well, you know, when Fiona told me about this institute, I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought, oh my gosh. And he said, but now, with the human genome coming on track, you're exquisitely poised to make the most of that. And so is the Raine study. And the Raine study was very much part of our institute for all those years. And what we were able to do was to, if you like, go in and out of the Raine study into the population databases or for other randomised controlled trials that we could get information on. And I think that was very important. So it was one of the pillars of the Institute's resources, data resources. Trying to get it funded was really, really hard. Cohort studies were not well funded by the National Health and Medical Research Council or by the ARC. That's changed a bit now with all of our lobbying of having to get cohort studies funded, but you had to go to other sources, and we did. But the thing that kept the Raine study going were the program grants that we managed to win from NHMRC, and we had 4 program grants over a 20-year period, and that got us through the funding for the Raine. But there were times when we didn't know whether we were going to be able to keep going. But I think that, it was such a rich source of information. The other thing it did, of course, for the Institute, and for me, is produced this huge number of wonderful PhDs and postdocs and research officers and research people who've gone on to do great things. And that's sort of, you become a bit like a mother hen and get rather clucky about all that. But it's terrific. I think it's had a major impact on medical research in Western Australia, actually, having this as a training ground for so many people, and they're able to do really good research for their PhDs with Laurie and Lou and John supervising. And I think that's been a terrific plus.
Now, I'm aware that we're approaching the end of the session, and I think everyone's probably anxious to go have a cup of tea and biscuit and chat about what's happened this morning. I think it would be a nice way to wrap up this session is by asking each of you the same question. And Ollie, I'm going to start with you. I'm so sorry. What is your most significant memory or experience as part of the Raine study?
I think the sleep study was definitely unique, and even more so because the Gen 1s got to do it, and my mother was quite an obliging participant, however my father was not so much. And I continue to hear about this every time the Raine study is brought up, that how much he disliked the sleep study and got fed a big curry before he went to bed and couldn't sleep, so the data didn't work, but maybe it did. Maybe that's the data that you need as well. But so that one's always been a funny one to kind of go back to.
I have
for
to
us.
come in on this because it was very interesting when we were doing the fasting bloods that the mums would come in, but the dads decided to go to work early. Well, so we actually had trouble getting enough dads initially to give blood.
Yeah, we had a couple. Well, actually, Di came over a couple of months ago and to do some questions, and it would have flowed a lot better if my mother was there, because Dad didn't really know much of the answers, did he? That's what we did anyway.
Rachel, did you have a memory that you'd like to share?
Well, I think it was probably just that whole thing of being involved in something bigger than, just having a baby, just being able to be a part of a club as a new mum and being a part of that extra with King Eddie's and the midwives and all of that. Yeah.
I think about the 10-year mark was when I think I had the comprehension to understand that this was something much bigger, and it was almost like it was much cooler than what my peers were involved in. And I lived in Kalgoorlie and got to go to Perth. And the researchers, when you were there, is it okay if we take your blood pressure? And we were encouraged to be actively involved from that point. But that's the point that I remember, that you go from being a child that just goes along to being actually participating in it.
A participant. Oh, that's lovely.
Fiona,
Well, I have to say, seeing John Newnham at the sausage sizzle at the 10-year-old birthday was pretty fantastic. So all these sort of very erudite and very clever clinicians were there with their aprons on, cooking sausages for all the 10-year-old Raine kids. That was pretty fun. But I do think one of the things that sticks out for me were the round tables with the kids and how we ran those. And I'm going to get sort of emotional again, but that really made a difference, because we really felt that they were giving so much support for what the Raine study was about and the data, the quality of the data and those sorts of things. So those round tables actually stick out for me quite well. But honestly, there are so many great Raine stories, I'm sure, that we could all spend hours talking about them. Anyway.
I think what a beautiful way to end it, and it's lovely to think about.
And you should go onto television. Believe me, you should.
It's a beautiful
got
way
it.
to end it, and I think just that emphasis on how appreciated we are as participants, but how much we appreciate you as well. And thank you so much for your time.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Tara, Oliver, Rachel and Rosanna, our participants, for participating in this. And on a personal note, I would like to thank Fiona for coming along today. I'm lucky enough to have been mentored by Fiona for the last 15 years and consider her a very good friend, and I really hope that I can continue on with your legacy and your hopes for the future for the Raine study in what we carry forward. So thank you, Fiona. I just want to say now is morning tea. Sorry, we are running a little bit behind time, but we will be going to morning tea now. It's on the terrace, and reconvening back here at 11:45. So for those of you who do have dietary requirements, please find the staff from the University Club and they will assist you there. So thank you.